Welcome to the Finance and Operations Committee meeting for July 27, 2021. Okay, as permitted by the board section 520.1 resolution, and due to the circumstances giving rise to that resolution, the board is holding this advertised public meeting virtually. The procedures for this virtual meeting are more fully detailed in the Upper Darby School District School Board COVID-19 Special Operating Procedures and include those for public participation. Dr. McGarry, would you please outline the public participation procedures, sir?
Yes, Board President Brown, thank you. As we move to virtual meetings, the board has made every effort to continue to engage with the public and ask for input prior to making decisions. Tonight, during our committee meeting, will be no different. Items that are discussed tonight, before the board decides whether they move them forward, any actual items, they'll take comment or questions from the public. In order for the public to participate, we ask that you do one of two options. One, that you send an email to committee questions, again, committee questions at upperdarbysd.org, or that you phone in at 610-789-7200, extension 2000, and you can leave a voicemail. Whether you're sending an email or sending a voicemail, please make sure that you provide your name, your address, and for tonight's meetings, there'll be two, one for Education and Pupil Services, followed, and after that, a Finance and Operations meeting, that you make sure that you identify the agenda item that you'd like to comment on or ask a question, and we'll be sure to address that to the best of our ability this evening. I'll provide an update as we go after each agenda item, because I think we have some tonight that may be a little bit lengthy, to provide those who are tuning in maybe later some access to contact with us.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. The meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. Roll call, Board Secretary, Mr. Rogers, please.
Dr. Haig,
I'm present.
Mr. Desnoyers,
Present.
Mr. Warsavage,
I'm present and can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Neal,
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Ms. Williams,
Present.
Mr. Fields,
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Ms. Mitchell,
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mrs. Curry,
I am present.
Mr. Brown.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. In order to allow this meeting to continue virtually and as permitted by Policy 003, I move to suspend portions of the following policies. From Policy 006, I move to suspend language in the section titled Public Participation to remove the words present at a board meeting, and thereby allowing board members of the public to participate through the other means we have provided. In Policy 006.1, I move to suspend the language, a majority of board members shall be physically present at a board meeting when a board member attends through electronic communications. This will allow as many board members as necessary to participate remotely. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed, please say I oppose and state your name for the record. Anyone abstaining, please say I abstain and state your name for the record. That motion carries. I will now turn over the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to my co-chair, Mr. Fields.
Thank you, Board President Brown. Mr. Rogers, please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening, and once finished, feel free to roll right into the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight we have three agenda items. The first up is the 2021 bond issuance update, which is informational. We'll provide an update on the finalized 2021 bond issuance and the positive impact that it will have on the district's capital plan. And this item correlates with Goal 1 of the Upper Darby School District Comprehensive Plan. Agenda item number 2 is a board policy, a discussion around board policies for public meetings. This will possibly require board action. The school board wishes to review and possibly update policies governing school board meetings, school board committee meetings, and special voting meetings, as the board has adopted new practices during COVID-19 pandemic. Board members responsible for this policy will present examples of language that the board may wish to adopt. The policies that may be affected include, but are not limited to, Policy 003 functions, 005 organizations, 006 meetings, 006.1 attendance at meetings via electronic communications, and 903 public participation in board meetings. The third agenda item is policies for this between first and second reading. This will require board action, policy 805, emergency preparedness, and 805.2, school security personnel. So we'll jump right into the bond update for 2021. So as the board and the public knows from our previous meetings and throughout the past years, we've been issuing bonds each year in order to move forward with our capital improvement plan. This is no different in 2021. We've provided updates in the past, but tonight we'll discuss the finalization of the bond. So here's an overview that we'll discuss tonight, which is the bond issuance timing, the positive impact of the bond, and the capital improvements that the money will be used to increase and improve the assets in the district. So first up, the bond timing. The board approved the max parameters resolution on May 11th, 2021. Following that, we moved forward with the process of going through the actual bond issuance. The next step in that was a Moody's interview, which is Moody's rating industry, which gives you a credit opinion. So on June 24th, I participated in an interview with a Moody's analyst who asked many questions about the finances of the district. Subsequent to that, on June 30th, the analyst and Moody's rating industry issued a credit opinion of A1 stable, which is consistent with the past 2 years of our rating, which is great, especially when you consider being in a pandemic, that financially they see us as a stable entity. Following that allows us to go out and have our financial advisors advertise and go out for pricing and eventually have a rate lock, which was done on July 8th, 2021. Subsequent to tonight, we'll have on August 8th the actual settlement. So everything's been finalized and signed off on, and we'll discuss what the results were. So again, similar to last year, we actually improved the rate this year. Last year was just above 2%, and we were extremely excited about the low rate. This year, it actually went down. So last year, we had a similar presentation for the 2020 bond, and we were very excited about the historically low rate, just over 2%. This year, the average yield comes out to 1.67. And similar to last year, we had discussed this, it's not the same as it's not a fixed rate each year, but the average year yield over the 30 years of the bond works out to 1.67. So in the beginning stages, the rate's actually below that. It's below 1%. As you get into the further years, the rate creeps up a little bit, but it averages out at 1.67, which is a phenomenal rate, which shows the district will save on the interest side of issuing the bond, which leads me right into the financial savings due to that low interest rate. Again, because of the low interest rate and the timing of the bond, through the budget process, we've actually been able to have a very, very minimal impact to the budget going into 21-22, which we had discussed during the budget presentation. Finally, this is the most exciting part about it. You know, the bond came out at a little over $36 million at the bond amount. There was a premium built in, which gave us roughly $40 million in cash that will be able to be put into the capitalized program to spend on capital improvements throughout the district. And this is just to show an illustration similar to the ones we've seen in the past of how low the rates are. You can see on that top graph, it goes back, I believe, 20 or 30 years there, and see the rates just creeping down. Then the cutout on the bottom is over the past 12 months, and you'll see that the rate really stabilized. We were a little concerned going into the process, and we tried to move a little faster than we did last year because there were some concerns from our advisors that there was a chance the rates were going to start creeping up. Luckily, they stayed level with where they were when we were in the process, and we did take advantage of that low rate. So just to discuss the $40 million and how it'll be allocated and which projects. So just a quick overview, and I'll kind of step back after I go through each one and add a little bit of information here. We're going to continue to do toilet renovations at Beverly Hills, which this would be the second phase. We are evaluating the other elementary schools that have not had their toilet renovations yet to determine which will be done, but we plan in the summer of '22 to go through another toilet renovation Currently, we have Stonehurst completed and Bywood underway this year that were funded through the 2020 bond. The funds will be used to continue design and construct and renovate at 8201 North Lansdowne Ave, which will be the new central administration, maintenance, and transportation site, or renovate it. The next is the Aeronamic Elementary School renovation and addition, Clifton Heights Middle School pre-construction, and a new elementary school pre-construction. Both of those are pre-construction phase, meaning going through the process of actually designing and working through all of the process to get to the point where we can actually bid the project. So the funds will be used to support moving both of those projects forward. We'll also include the track and field renovations at Drexel Hill Middle School and Beverly Hills Middle School. So when you look at this list, it looks very familiar to the 2020 list, really because that goes right in line with our capital improvement plan. We are going to continue to improve the toilet facilities throughout the district, which by next year, we'll have both middle schools done. We've done a wing at the high school. We'll have 2 elementaries done, and in next summer, work on a third. And we'll continue to go through that process over the next few summers. 8201 and Aeronamic specifically, as well as Clifton Heights, were also on this list in 2020. If you recall, we weren't able to issue as much money as we would have liked to because of the low rates in 2020, because Aeronamic was under appeal, and we could not fund the entire project through that bond because we didn't know the likelihood of the process and how long it was going to take. Luckily, we've had positive results through the process. Aeronamic's bids have been awarded, the work is underway, and therefore we had to shift money around in the 2020 bond. So the 2020 bond still covered a portion of Aeronamic, 8201 and Clifton, but now that we've moved past that pre-construction phase and now into the construction phase, we're picking up the bulk of the project in this new issuance. Similar to Clifton Heights and the new elementary school, you'll likely see those as we move through years and any new issuance, because the funds aren't fully there to construct a new middle school and a new elementary school. But you'll see that similarity from slide to slide from last year's presentation to this. So I'll, at this time, just ask if the board has any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Rogers. That was great. Yeah, definitely. If anybody has any questions, but I do like really inexpensive borrowed money, and that 1.65. That's an average, right?
That's
over
correct.
the years. So some days it's less, or some years it's less, some years it's more, but that's the overall average, and that is just great work. Mr. Rogers, I really appreciate it. I think everybody on the board and the entire community appreciates it, and that's just fantastic. I'm glad you were in there on the interview with Moody's. I'm glad you were able to get this done. I believe Dr. Haig has a short comment, and then Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Fields, and thank you, Mr. Rogers, for the presentation. I'd just always like to sort of remind any listeners that getting a good credit rating is not changing the fact that we're still a very underfunded district. I think sometimes people lose sight of the difference between our income and our management of our finances. And Mr. Rogers, obviously, and his team, they do an excellent job, but think of us like a low-income household that nevertheless pays all their bills on time, does everything they can to scrimp and save and pinch, and so they get a good credit rating, and that's great, but it doesn't mean that they really have enough money for all their needs. It means they're constantly scrimping and saving every little bit they can. So thank you to your team, and I'm also excited we're saving some money.
Thanks, Dr. Haig. Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Director Fields, and thank you, Mr. Rogers, for your presentation. My question is regarding refinancing. Could you review, were there any refinancing opportunities for the outstanding bonds that are still active, like 2010, 2011, 2015, 2018, and such?
Sure. So over the past year, we actually did refinance 2. They were notes. We've refinanced them into a bank loan because there was the term, and just off the top of my head, I believe the term was around, I think there was less than 5 years left on each, which allowed us to do a short-term borrowing in the refinance versus going out for another general obligation and spreading it out over many further years. We consolidated two and refinanced them into a bank loan at a much lower rate, which saved the district. I believe the final amount was roughly around $80,000 over the next, I believe it was 5 years. And although it's not a staggering amount, it was still something that was great for us to be able to go out and see some kind of savings. The rest of our bonds that are issued are not at a point where they would be able to be refinanced. Those two that we did refinance, we got in a very unique situation with where the rates dropped to over the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Yeah, I just wanted to hear about that additional money saved, but through those refinancing options. And I think even though you said, even though it doesn't seem like a lot of money, it does add up, when you combine it with the other savings that you and your team do throughout these past years. So thank you again.
Craig, I just wanted to ask, obviously, thanks to you and your team, we've been fiscally responsible and we're actually being good stewards of the resources, no matter how meager. Are you seeing other districts, or are you aware of other districts whose bond rating was adversely affected because of COVID? Obviously ours hasn't, but I'm just curious to know.
So right now, Moody's is, and typically they are, very adverse to increasing your rating, giving you a better rating. It's always, they're very quick to take you down versus trying to climb back up. I'm not aware of specific districts. I know it happened through the Commonwealth that there were some that were adversely affected. I fought tooth and nail, to Meredith's point. One of the big things they always bring up is the budget, the use of fund balance, going through historically. We really play into how we've been moving in a positive trend as far as how much use of fund balance versus, we go through it every year when we talk about the budget. We would need, in my opinion, significant state funding to increase it. I still try to make the argument every year that we've done this, which is the third year in a row. And I thought this year we had them close. The rating agency, the analyst, was very happy with the call. But, we did get a little bit more funding this year from the state. Our state budget did go up. The fact that it was level funded the year before was nerve-wracking when we did the rating before. If the state continues to increase it, I think we can continue to make a stronger case than we ever have before. We're not there yet. Although it's great that we did get additional funds this year, I hope it continues in that direction so that we can really have an equitable distribution of funds from the state. And if that does happen, it will lead into a stronger budget, which would hopefully lead to an increased rating in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, President Brown. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Why don't we, if there's no other questions, I don't see any, why don't we roll into the rest of the agenda items?
Sure. So next up is the conversation around the board policies for meetings. And I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Desnoyers.
Thank you. This is the board would like to review and think about updating policies that govern our meetings. And under the school code, the board needs to have this discussion publicly. So the reason for this discussion now is that a number of practices have been implemented during the pandemic, such as allowing community members to phone in and email in comments. And some of these practices, the board could very reasonably want to continue. So we'll go through the policy language and decide whether or not the board would like to make updates. We will first have a quick overview of how this presentation will go. We'll look at the policies that are potentially impacted. We'll look at current policy summaries and then recommendations, and then we will circle back through and give the board members the chance to weigh in on what they would like to see in terms of policy. So as I mentioned, the reasons we might want to review policies are implement new practices or allow for new practices, allow the board to discuss how it would like to run our meetings, and ensure that policies reflect best practices for running meetings. So as Mr. Rogers stated when he went over the agenda, the 5 policies are policy 003 functions, policy 005 organization, policy 006 meetings, policy 006.1 attendance at meetings via electronic communication, and policy 903 public participation at board meetings. So policy 003 lays out the 4 basic authorities that the board has, or 4 means the board has to accomplish change. Policy 005 lays out the items the board may or must do at meetings over the course of a year. Policy 006 lays out requirements for the major types of meetings. Policy 006.1 governs participation in board meetings virtually by board members, and policy 903 governs public participation at board meetings. So the board can think about updating, making a change to the legislative authority and the executive authority, and include language that says the success of the board superintendent relationship is based on clear communication, and as far as evaluation of board procedures, we can consider adding language that requires policies to be reviewed by the board on some timeline. Under the officers section, we could consider including basically the job responsibilities of the board secretary in the policy. Policy 006, the policy currently specifies that O. Garfield Jones is the parliamentary authority under which the board operates. This could be either changed to Robert's rules or eliminated entirely. Under policy 006 for a quorum, we could adopt language basically stating that no board member can be considered part of a quorum until they have sworn the oath of office and been seated as a school director. Next up, we could consider adding a type, clarifying the fact that meetings of the board are official meetings, so make that a meeting type and say that all official meetings have certain characteristics. We could include that. Next slide, please. As far as regular meetings go, the requirement for regular meetings is that they take place at a specific location, and the question is, does that fit with if an entirely virtual meeting needs to take place, does having the word place in there make sense? Under the section for public participation, residents, taxpayers, and school district association presidents are allowed to speak. We could ask ourselves, do we need to include school district association presidents? And then we can consider adding language that can limit public participation if necessary. Moving on to the voting section, we can consider roll call voting for all board members participating via electronic communication. The next item, item number 2.0, is simply language cleanup. Next slide, please. Policy 006 continued. We could consider adding language that lays out when school directors are required to abstain from voting. That is in the school code, but it's not in policy. For executive or closed sessions of the board, we can consider adding language that is now allowed under state law for school boards to meet in executive session to discuss matters related to school safety. Next slide, please. And policy 006.1, attendance at meetings via electronic communication, really doesn't allow for mostly or completely virtual meetings, so this needs significant updating. And policy 903 currently requires members of the community to be physically present if they wish to speak at a board meeting, and this doesn't allow for virtual meetings when the public can't attend, is not allowed to attend. So, having gone through that, if I could ask you to go back to slide 5. Actually, I apologize, slide 7, recommendations. And the items I mentioned, the board can consider changing. I have a list, and I'll just walk through, and in places the recommendations are laid out on the slide, and in other places I will make a recommendation, and the board can feel free to, board members can feel free to discuss. So the first item, policy 003, under legislative, this is language that would essentially allow the emergency adoption of policies for the current board meeting. This seems like it's, I don't feel a strong need for this language, but if the board wished to go forward with that, we could. Any thoughts on that?
I just have a question, if whether we sort of implicitly have this power already, and this is a desire to state it more explicitly, or do we need?
I believe our solicitor can weigh in, but I believe we have this power implicitly, but this would just say, put out there in the policy that said that, you know, the ability, it would put in the policy for the public to see that, yes, this power is inherent in the board. We decide how we run our meetings, and tonight's discussion is part of that.
And that's absolutely the case. I'm sorry if I needed to be recognized first. But so this is Kyle Berman, and I will simply indicate that the board always has the power to establish and change policies, and change the way that it's going to be adopting policies, and to change essentially anything that it does by policy. It can make a decision to do something in a different fashion. That being said, it is worthwhile in some respect to indicate to the public the parameters in which you will generally operate and take action. So while you may have this authority implicitly, and if you were to look through the school code, it's actually explicitly, it doesn't hurt to have such language in your policy as well, so that if somebody is concerned about what you could or couldn't be doing at a given meeting, that they could understand your the extent to which you can go.
I mean, based on that explanation, it sounds like it's a good thing to add it just for clarity's sake, if nothing else.
So the community would have something, if we chose to invoke that, the community would, if any community member so wanted, they could
Have input and opinion.
they could see it there that, yes, this is appropriate for the board to do.
Director Desnoyers?
Yes.
May I do have an additional question for our solicitor. The approval of 2/3 of the board membership, would that be those that are present? Or should we change that to just the majority of board membership? Because if we had a situation where 3 members were out, we still have a quorum, but we wouldn't have the 2/3 necessary to make a change in policy if needed.
So that is up to you. The idea of using 2/3 of board membership is intended to make it so that it's difficult to do. So, I mean, in that respect, it is meant to mean that you need 6 board members voting for it. And but that's not, there are some instances in the school code that require that you have 2/3 of board membership to vote for something. Policy is not one of them.
I personally favor the 6 board member requirement for this because emergency implementation of a policy is such a drastic step.
I agree with you, Neil.
I agree, Neil. This is Gina Curry.
All right, thank you for explaining that, Kyle.
Under executive function of the board, we could make it explicit that the board evaluates the superintendent on the implementation of board policies. Is that something we'd like to do? I'm not hearing a strong desire for that, so I'll put that down as a no.
Question, I'm sorry, this is Gina Curry. So where that's concerned, would that be like, just to give an example for the public, like the health and safety plan for the pandemic?
Well, that would be, so the one significant area or one significant way the board can exert its influence is by adopting policies. And it is the superintendent, with assistance from administration and staff, that has the responsibility of implementing those policies day to day. And so the superintendent is evaluated by the board following following a process that is governed by the school code or PDE regulations, correct? So this would not change anything about the superintendent's annual evaluation. It would just add a note to the policy that says, you know, the board, you know, should recognize that by adopting policy, it is directing how the superintendent operates the school district.
To Meredith's point from earlier, I think it's implicitly understood that we are holding the superintendent accountable for implementing the policies that we enact.
I agree.
I don't know if we need to call it out as like it's a separate entity other than the criteria by which we evaluate him. That's just my thoughts.
Okay, I lean that way also, so.
I do have just a question about this executive paragraph 2 about the superintendent evaluation. Mr. Desnoyers, are you implying that this is in the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District policies, or is this something that you think we should be considering?
It is in the Wallingford-Swarthmore policy, and I included it because it is if we added this language, it would be further explanation of the superintendent's responsibilities delegated by the board.
Okay, I think it's already implicit in our evaluation process of the superintendent, which is quite extensive. So I would not be in favor of adding this at this time to our policy.
Okay, thank you. We can also consider adding the effective communication language, essentially explicitly stating that for the board and the superintendent to work best together, there has to be effective communication on both sides or all sides.
Now that I agree with, Mr. Desnoyer. Sorry to speak out of turn, Mrs. Mitchell.
I also agree with it. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Director Don. That makes sense.
Thank you. The last item on this page, evaluation of board procedures, we could consider adding language that policies must be reviewed by the board on a certain interval. I put down 4 years because that's a reasonably common interval. I think I would like to see that this considered in the future, but I don't think we're at the point where it should be implemented now.
And Director Desnoyers, this is in reference to only policies in 000 local board procedures, not policies overall, correct?
This would be all policies, so that's why for the board to commit to reviewing policies on any type of basis is a big ask.
Yeah, I would agree, because there are a lot of policies. I would have the board consider possibly just evaluating the local board procedure, section 000, at least every 4 years to make sure that we are staying up to date with what's current and what the needs are of our community and how they receive information.
Okay, thank you.
This Director Fields, I would support that as well. The local policies every 4 years have a good review by the board.
Okay, thank you. For the section on officers, Wallingford-Swarthmore has the job responsibilities of the board secretary in their policy. We could consider adding this. I would have to imagine, perhaps our board secretary or our solicitor can confirm that the duties of the board secretary are probably very well laid out in the school code or other regulations. This would just put them in policy.
I mean, I don't have an issue with it, but, you know, are there other positions that we need to add other than the secretary?
Perhaps our solicitor can give some insight on the wisdom of including something like this.
I actually don't have any input one way or the other. If you choose to put it in, you certainly can have it there, so that the members of the public that might be looking through your policy might know what the different positions do, what the different officers do. At the same time, there really is no requirement to do it, since this is language that's almost directly from the school code.
Okay.
And my own view on language from the school code is it has a place, and that is in the school code.
Okay. Thank you. So I was not making a strong recommendation to include this language, and I think the board secretary knows his responsibilities very well and executes them very well. So I recommend leaving the language out.
I would agree with that, Director Jesnour. This is Director Neal.
Under Parliamentary Authority, so our policy 006 currently states that meetings will be governed by O. Garfield Jones Parliamentary Authority, and O. Garfield Jones is essentially a summary of Robert's rules. It hasn't been updated in a few years, and it is published as a means of allowing someone running a meeting to be able to quickly look up the appropriate Robert's Rules item. So I feel it doesn't really have a place in our procedures. If we want to specify a parliamentary authority to govern our meetings, I recommend Robert's Rules. The other option would be to strike any reference to parliamentary authority altogether. Gina.
I think I'm in favor of the Roberts Rule of Order. I don't think we should strike it.
Okay.
I think it should be a part of it.
Any other comments?
I just wanted to say that I agree with changing Robert's Rules of Order. It should have been done a while ago. So I'm in agreement with that.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. Yeah, I would also agree. That was my comment. I don't think we should remove it. I think we should have some governance on how our meetings are operated.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So, the section for a quorum. There must be a quorum of the board to hold a meeting at which official business is conducted. This is language that says, a board member can't be considered towards meeting the quorum if they have not sworn to the oath of office and been properly seated as a school director. I feel this is somewhat unnecessary, so I am not pushing for it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Director Jesnour, this is Director Neal. Yeah, I mean, just because an individual can't participate until, they do take the oath, but is this I mean, this is in our membership. Is it the membership in 004 membership, or how we take the oath? I forget.
Yeah,
Like how
there
we
is
do
a,
yeah, how we fill in vacancies. So I'm not sure if this is needed for 006. But like, are you saying like if we had only 4 school board directors, we technically don't have a quorum? Are you saying that we would need? I'm not sure when we would use this
I,
language. Yeah.
um, school board member essentially is not a school board member until they have been properly sworn in as governed by, as Director Neal stated, policy 004. And our solicitor is, has a comment. I would like to call on him.
All right, so first of all, this is likely only ever going to come up at reorganization, or it could potentially come up at when the board member, when there's a vacancy and the board member is being selected. So you'd never actually, in a vacancy situation, you're never going to have a situation where you have less than a quorum without that member, because to be able to fill a vacant seat, you need a majority of all sitting board members to have voted for that person to begin with. Second of all, as far as at reorganization, the way that this normally comes up is that, to be quite frank, this is something that is meant to warn board members that you're not going to be seated until after you've had the oath. So there, you know, for instance, this coming December, since there is an election that's going to take place in November, there are certain board members whose terms will have ended at the beginning of that meeting. So they will not be sitting board members until they have retaken the oath of office. There are some boards where the board members apparently don't realize that they're not supposed to at that point be sitting at the table. They're not taking part in the meeting until after they have subscribed to the oath, which can be administered there at the meeting, but there's still this step that's involved before they're part of the board again. So it's not necessarily that this is a monumental issue, but it is something that needs to be understood by board members, that they don't actually, they're not serving as board members until they've resubscribed to the oath. I see that there is a question for me.
Yes, Kyle, even,
President Brown?
yes, thank you, Kyle. For board members, like even when we interview them and we elect someone that night, we normally have them take the oath immediately before they're seated. So I think we're covered in our normal procedures. Am I mistaken? Am I not, am I correct in that?
You're absolutely correct. So if you have if the board members that are filling a vacancy were to immediately subscribe to the oath, they are then immediately seated. There are instances where there is not, for instance, a notary present, in which case the board member cannot subscribe to the oath that evening. You know, either a notary present or somebody else who is permitted to give the oath. Keep in mind that the oath that is often administered by either the sitting president or somebody else in that respect, somebody else is presiding, doesn't actually have the ability to administer the oath except at the reorganizational meeting when the temporary president is given that power. So there shouldn't be an issue that would come up, but I just want to make sure that it's understood this is really not something that is meant to be an impediment to a board member taking their seat. It simply points out that there is a requirement to have the oath before they get seated.
Thank you, Kyle. There is a very good understanding in this current board of this requirement, and as Board President Brown commented, it's in our procedures, so.
In reference to this quorum passage, would this be better suited for policy 3? I'm sorry, policy 4 in the membership instead of meeting the quorum? And this might be a question for Kyle,
Well,
whether or not the policy would better have this passage in policy 4.
Policy 4, this language could go there, but I believe it is, it's laid out in policy 4 that board members take an oath of office, and the oath is now, the oath that is taken is actually now attached to policy 4, so I don't think it's needed there either.
If you were to add this language to policy 006, the way that it is, the way that it belongs here is to essentially indicate that the board has to, or it reinforces that the board operates as a group, not as individual members. And it simply helps to outline that the people who are going to then be counted as part of that group are the ones that take the oath. But again, I'm not taking a position on whether or not this is appropriate language for either policy.
Next item is, do we want to declare that meetings of the board where action can be taken are official meetings, and official meetings have certain characteristics? It is fairly widely known that our meetings are structured in a certain way and follow a general format. So I don't feel a strong need to include this language.
Director DeSnores, I do have a question for Kyle. As an official meeting, are executive sessions considered an official meeting? I noticed that it wasn't written in this blurb here.
Yeah, so executive sessions are official meetings. They're not public meetings, but they are official.
Okay, yeah, my concern with this paragraph is executive sessions aren't listed, and then the following sentence says, all official meetings of the school board shall be open meetings, and that is not true for an executive session. We do go over the general agenda of those meetings, but they are not open.
I was also looking at the language under the official meetings, and it says that it's limited to, but they aren't limited to business meetings. The business meetings, are they equivalent to a legislative meeting?
Business meetings are meetings where the board can take action. So we could, if we didn't like the terminology official meetings, we could use different language that would specifically meant to say a meeting of board members held, an open meeting of board members held where action can take place, meaning official deliberations can take place and the board can vote on taking action. We could refer to those as business meetings, for instance, and that would get around Director Neal's concern about not including executive sessions.
Okay, all right, thank you. I was just wondering if it had to be specified, the type of meetings that we have. So, we have the committee meeting that we're having tonight, we have legislative meetings, and then if there are special meetings called, if they had to be specified, at that time, but it sounds like that if we say official meetings, that'll cover everything.
It does. The the possible confusion is that executive sessions are official meetings, so I would prefer to leave this out.
Can I just help? I mean, that's part of my comment. I was going to say, you can simply say all official meetings with the exception of executive sessions of the school board shall be open meetings. Then that's covered. If you just add that piece, that it
Okay.
will take care of it. So that there's no confusion with executive sessions. It is an official meeting, but it's not a public meeting. So adding that blurb, I think, would take care of it.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. Under regular meetings, the policy currently has has language that says meetings occur at a place. If we wish to, if an all virtual meeting is held, in order to allow for an all virtual meeting to be held, should we say the place or mode of meeting, for instance?
Yeah, Director Desnoyers, I think in terms of the word place, I think that could be interpreted as virtual as well. So I don't know if we need to include the mode of the meeting, but I would suggest to the board to consider whether we want to continue live. Actually, this would fall under public participation. I apologize. I'll hold off on that.
Okay, thank you. Under public participation, the policy currently specifies that residents, taxpayers, and school district association presidents can speak, and I have two items about this. First, I would like to ask our solicitor if school district association presidents is in the school code, then my question for the board is, if it is not in the school code, do we want to remove this language?
So I can answer the question about the school code piece. First of all, I don't think you mean the school code, because none of these pieces about public meetings, or almost none of them, are from the school code. They're from the Sunshine Act.
Thank you.
And the Sunshine Act does not say anything about school district association presidents. It simply there states that residents and taxpayers have to be given, and it is their privilege to speak at public meetings of the board. As far as whether or not to keep that in, I will point out, and I don't know the answer to this, but the one other place that might be a source of where this language comes from, or this requirement comes from, could be the collective bargaining agreement, where you might have given or bargained for the ability for the association presidents to speak. I don't know if it's there, but I just want to make sure that it's not there before you choose to remove it.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was thinking that school district association presidents were something to do with essentially parents, or the band boosters, or the some similar entity like that. I was not thinking of the president of the Upper Darby Educational Association or something like that.
That is my understanding of what's meant by this, but maybe I was mistaken.
So my understanding was also that this was referring to the collective bargaining units, and I certainly wouldn't want one of our union presidents to be unable to speak at the meetings simply because they live in, Havertown or Springfield or something, they live a town over. These people play a really important role in our community, and I personally would want to hear from those people at our meetings. So maybe we just need clarification.
Okay, thank you. Then, yes, it was, I should say that I very much support the ability of our union presidents to speak in front of the board.
I have a question for the board. I would like to actually open it up for any employee to be able to address the board. I don't know what you guys think, but I'll just kind of open it up. Yeah.
I would not be in favor of that. I think that many of our school district employees are represented by unions, and through that they have, through those bodies, they have means by which they can influence their working conditions, and they essentially have a voice in front of the board. And I think that I am perfectly happy to have union presidents speak, but it could, allowing any employee to speak could lengthen board meetings considerably.
Yeah, Director Jusnori. So, not all employees of the district are union members, so they wouldn't have the opportunity if they did not live in the district.
I appreciate the process of involving union leadership. That came up several years ago, and we did change the policy to allow union presidents to do that, to be an advocate and to discuss it. I understand Mr. Neal's comments and question. There are process and procedures for voices to be heard in the district. We have instruction and curriculum meetings where union representation, not just presidents, participate. We have meet and discuss meetings. We have district meetings. There's also a process whereby if there is a member of the organization who feels that they would like to have a public hearing or public discussion instead of a private, they can request that if they wanted to have that take place. So I think keeping it to the union presidents makes the most sense. But I'm not, just a suggestion.
So I was thinking that I can recall times when there were some very supportive staff members who want to get up to the mic and in support of what the district was doing. And so I understand that, the teachers and staff, they're critical to us operating here. And so I'm just wondering if there were spaces like that, like Dr. McGarry stated, if it would have to be included in the policy, or at those times how it could be organized so that those voices could also be heard and not felt like they were muted.
Employees who are residents of the district are under the current policy, are very welcome to and have spoken at meetings. And I think there are things the board can do to obtain input and feedback from employees, both on an informal and formal, both in informal and formal ways. And I think this board does a reasonable job at that. And I just don't support allowing any employee on a whim to stand up and speak at a board meeting. Next up, voting. Is there any interest on the board in implementing is there any interest in the board in implementing a rule that school directors participating electronically vote by roll call vote?
I actually think this is a very good idea, especially, I happen to be participating virtually tonight. I sort of would like to know that my fellow board members actually voted on something. So I think this is a good addition to our policy.
I agree with with Director Mitchell on this one.
Yeah, I would agree too. Now, I don't, would we have two separate votes then? You have a vote of the in-person and then a vote of the virtual participants?
Yes.
Isn't that how we're currently operating? So, okay, never mind. I was thinking about the virtual in terms of how it's working currently.
Okay. This would be when a motion is made and has to be voted on. Those of us around the table would say yes or no, and then the board secretary would poll the individual board members participating virtually.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll include that language. The second item under voting I was mentioning is just cleaning up language. I am in favor of it. If there's strong opposition, it won't be included. Meaning we have two policies that specifically that are there solely to specify when purchases must go out for bid. So this item in this policy would be just say for bid amounts, look at the specific bid requirement policies.
So you're recommending the underline taking it out, and then just referencing the policy numbers. I don't see the policy numbers listed in the new quote.
In the presentation, the last sentence of this item says policies 610 and 611 specify bid amounts required by law. So the revised language would just say bid requirements can be found in policies 610 and 611.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. The board can add explicit language that states when school directors are required to abstain from voting. It is something that board members must already follow, but we could put it in the policy so that, again, interested community members could see it. Okay. We already discussed the next item, the place of the meeting. So I'm going to move to executive session. A relatively new reason the board may hold an executive session is to discuss items related to school safety. I would like to put this in the policy so that, again, any interested community members can see it. Okay, we're closing in on the end. Policy 006.1, attendance at meetings via electronic participation. So this policy does not currently allow mostly or completely virtual meetings and needs to be rewritten to allow such. If any board member has any comments on something they would like to see in this policy, I'd be happy to record it and put it in the draft version of the policy. Otherwise, Director Neal and I can work with our solicitor and revise the policy.
My comment is in regard, so in here, there are some uh, 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 changes to make for gender inclusive language. Also, it does say that a majority board member shall be physically present at a board meeting when a board member attends through electronic communications. I would like to change that where it doesn't matter whether a majority of the board members are present, physically present. I don't know what the other opinions are on the board, but I did want to open that up to a discussion. I know we do have to submit to the board president prior to the board meeting that we would need to be participating virtually, and the reason for that. So, you know, I would that would kind of hinder our ability if a majority of people could not make a meeting physically due to illnesses or whatnot.
I would actually like to take this opportunity to ask our solicitor if he can give us a couple examples of language that school districts have adopted recently since the pandemic. Or are there any features of electronic meetings, virtual meetings, or have any best practices been established?
Well, okay, so your request as far as since the pandemic began is, the answer is no. I think that everybody so far is putting into place stopgap measures that are meant to simply get them through the pandemic, where people are coming up with all sorts of ad hoc rules. The reason that I had originally pointed you towards the Wallingford-Swarthmore policies was mostly because they had decided at the beginning of the pandemic actually to address this. So the policy that you're looking at that you looked at that was 006.1, one that went through large revisions. Now, I will also say that PSBA has created a policy 006.1 that is different than that. And as a matter of fact, there are districts that my firm represents that have all come up with different versions as well. So I will say that there is not any one uniform way that this has been done. I would say that the version of the policy that you have in place right now is really meant as a disincentive to participation remotely, or more to the point, it is meant to make the virtual participation a rarity, where it's possible that what the board is looking to do here in Upper Darby is actually make it so that it is more feasible for board members to do it often. I don't know what the answer to that is, and I think that's something that really is a basic foundational policy issue that you have to decide whether or not you want your board members to be able to participate remotely or not.
Okay, so I strongly recommend we allow board members to participate virtually, and I strongly recommend that we allow, if necessary, a majority of board members to participate virtually.
I was really thinking about how we're operating through the pandemic. The side of the majority of board members not being present once we open up the room to the public again bothers me, I must say.
Okay.
I do think that it's a consideration that we should have the ability to do. We're community members, and so we there are things that do come up where we don't want to miss meetings, but might have to because of travel for work or having a sick child at home, these types of things, where in the past we would have to miss completely. That would mean missing a vote, that would mean missing opportunities to have comments. So I do agree with the option of attending virtually, but as far as the majority, I feel like once the public is allowed back in, once we're inviting the public back in, it would be a little awkward if the majority of the public was in the audience, in the room, and there were only 2 board members or something like that. I don't know. That's just my thought. Thank you.
So we could add language that the expectation is that board members would be physically present, except in unusual circumstances.
I'm not sure, and Mr. Berman, I'm not sure how that would play out in the policy, because there are sensitive matters that could come up, but I don't know how we should actually write that. I stand on the fact that, we should have more board members in than out.
My comment is regarding I do feel that there could be a perfect storm, and where we have 5 members not present due to various reasons, and they do have to go through the president of the board in those cases. So I feel there would be some measures in place that would enable people to participate still. But that will also go back to Gina's point, when the public is then back into the building during these meetings. Public participation, will the board continue to allow emailed comments, phoned-in comments to be read during those public meetings, or will we go back to only in person? Now, I am for transparency. I am for more public engagement and the opportunity to do such. As Vice President Curry mentioned, some of us can't make the meeting due to various reasons, and that's the same for the public. They cannot make the meetings for various reasons, but they still have a say, and they still should be heard. So would the board consider allowing public participation moving forward to allow the continuation of emailed comments or phoned-in comments?
Director Neal, I was actually going to discuss that under policy 903, the next item for discussion. So once we conclude our discussion of policy 006 and how to allow for board members to attend virtually, we were going to move on to policy 903, which specifically governs public participation. Thank you.
All right, so keep that in the back of your heads. I'm not going to say it again, so you'll already have my comment. Thank you, Director Dismore.
So I think about how we operated during most of the pandemic when I think, the superintendent and key administrators were in the room along with myself and maybe one other board member. And I think we was able to conduct business. So when the public comes back, I'm envisioning that would still be a successful model where they would still be able to the public would be in the meetings. And if it was just, me, maybe another board member, the vice president perhaps, or another board member, I still think that we would be able to conduct, because that's how we conducted it so far. And I don't think having the public in the room would be an intrusion or have an inability for us to conduct business. The main thing is to give them the best of all possible worlds where they can engage. And I think we should, now we're going to get to it in a minute, but, we want to give them the ability to participate in their presence, here in the room or via phone message or email. And that gives them whatever, that gives them all of the options that they need in order to participate. And sometimes life gets in the way for us, as you alluded to. But, we would still be able to conduct business. So that's my thing. I think we should be able to do it virtually, even without a majority of board members in the room and still have the public here to participate?
For as far as policy 006.1, I would just be an advocate for adding that the majority of board members could attend the board meeting virtually in the case of a declared emergency. I agree with Director Curry, where the majority of the board members should be present in the room. That's what we ran for and were elected. We come into this knowing full well what our responsibilities are. So I would just be an advocate for just adding the word emergency to that policy for emergency situations, so that we don't have to do that voting thing in the beginning of the meeting they are virtual. We all know that we do not know the future of what the pandemic holds for us. It seems to be, a very, keep going up the roller coaster and then down. So I would just advocate for the emergency.
Director Mitchell, that is an excellent point, and I fully agree. And so therefore I agree with Vice President Curry as well.
I just want to echo what other people have said in terms of it really being a reinforcing and comforting presence to encourage and require, when most appropriate, a majority of the board members be physically present. And that just matches the approach that we're taking with our students and our families as we're re-inviting them back into what full in-person, quote unquote, instruction looks like. It matches what other responsible electeds are doing elsewhere. And I just want to make sure to remind the public that in our discussions of in-person versus virtual, they are not mutually exclusive. They're meant to work in tandem, because these policies that we're discussing and things like that, it's not meant to hem what it is we are responsible for doing. It's meant to be an extra added level of encouragement to make sure that we are putting the best people in positions to succeed possible on behalf of the public. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for your comment, Director Warsavage. It's great to hear from you.
My comments in response to Director Mitchell's comment about the emergencies. Now, currently in Pennsylvania, there is not a declared emergency. So as of this point, we would need a majority of board members to be present. Now, in my opinion, the state legislature has now made the declared emergencies a political emergency. So you could have, depending on the party in power, a different interpretation of what would meet the criteria of a declared emergency. So we could have board members that feel it is a true emergency. They do not feel comfortable being in person at a board meeting, where a majority of board members do feel in that way. So the declared emergency, in my opinion, needs to be evaluated and discussed and actually defined if we were to use that terminology.
So there was a resolution that stated, whereas the World Health Organization has declared the current outbreak of COVID-19 a global pandemic, and whereas the Pennsylvania Department of Education has determined the COVID pandemic constitutes an emergency, and so forth. If we could, that was at the board meeting 2 weeks ago. We adopted that resolution. So declared emergency is the declared emergency language that Director Mitchell used, yes, is open to some interpretation, but clearly for the board to adopt a resolution declaring an emergency in the district, that's, I think, a pretty major step, and not one that the board would take lightly, so that I think if we just use the language declared emergency, I fully support the language Ms. Mitchell used, stating declared emergency. I think Kyle, our solicitor has maybe a comment. It's perhaps Mr. Berman can clarify the resolution that we passed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so the resolution that you passed 2 weeks ago was actually authorized by the Department of Education under Section 520.1 of the school code, which allowed you under those circumstances to indicate that there is an emergency, or more to point, to recognize that there is an emergency and act on that under those circumstances. So you absolutely cannot decide on your own that there is an emergency, but you can take action as permitted by the school code, and the school code does permit you also to have certain things that are otherwise present. So, like I believe that 520.1 includes snowy roads and other things that would prevent you from keeping the school open, which is a different issue than what we're talking about here.
Mr. Berman, thank you very much for the clarification. I didn't obviously remember exactly what the resolution was we passed, and I appreciate the clarification. But I will go back to the fact that a declared emergency is a pretty substantial step for a government agency to take, and that echoing Vice President Curry's and Director Mitchell's comments, that the board members serve at the pleasure of the community, and the best way for the community to see and hear that we are doing our jobs is if we are physically present. Okay, if we can move on to policy 903, the last three items. I strongly recommend continuing to allow community members to make public comment via email and telephone. Does any director wish to comment or wish to suggest otherwise?
So as of right now, we have certain time constraints on the comments. So for voting meetings, if it's a general comment, it has to come in before the meeting. If it's a comment on a specific report, it has to come in before the end of the report. And I think both of those make a lot of sense. The committee meetings currently, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, allow for commenting at any time. We've had moments where there's sort of been, people sort of commenting multiple times, which I guess we've already addressed. It's so very easy to sit at home and just keep typing comments. And I completely understand that we do have measures in place that limit an individual to 3 minutes. I do worry a little bit that, I want to encourage participation very much, but I worry that if we have a contentious issue and someone decides they're going to keep commenting, oh wait, they can't keep commenting. Okay, they're going to tell their friend to comment, and they're going to tell that friend to comment. That friend doesn't have to do anything. So I just wonder whether there should be a few more time constraints on the committee meetings. It's just a thought.
So that I was going to bring that concern up by saying, do the requirements, do the authorities given to the board in policy 903 need to be amended to consider situations when there is a lack of decorum in emailed and telephoned comments. So essentially, we'll consider the first two items under policy 903 in the presentation together as one, or rather all three as one. I don't have any particular suggestions for this, and I'd be happy to research and provide possible language for the board if the board would. Now, before I say this, I should say our community has taken advantage of, has strongly supported by their participation the emailed and phoned in comments, and they have to date. The community has submitted them overwhelmingly respectfully and such. But it has crossed my mind that essentially for contentious issues, could this be an issue? And there are specifics laid out in this policy for a community member who is physically present in a meeting. I would be happy to research and provide sample language for the board to consider lack of decorum issues for emailed and phoned in comments.
Director Desnoyers, so we could also include public comment via telephone and email into the record without actually reading those at the. We only have public comment from those physically present. So we could allow public comment and public participation through those modes, but not actually read them during our meeting. They would be provided to the board to review before and during the meeting. So especially if it's a voting meeting, that we have those resident comments. That could be a compromise between both.
Thank you, Director Neal, for that suggestion, and I would propose language that says if emailed and phoned-in comments are excessive in nature, they will not be read and will be instead put straight in the record. And I see some heads nodding. And that then concludes this presentation and discussion. When the agenda items are reviewed, I will ask Mr. Rogers to simply poll the board as to whether we should move forward revising the policies as discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Desnoyers. Ms. Rogers, if there's, continue with the rest of the agenda items, please.
Sure. Next up is the policy review which will require board action for policy 805 and 805.2, which went through the first reading at the July board meeting. And at this time, I'll hand it over to Mr. Desnoyers.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. There are no changes to these policies other than the changes that were posted for the first reading 2 weeks ago. The summary of changes is posted to board docs. Thank you.
Are there any comments from the public?
There are no comments from the public.
Thank you, Ms. Buford. I think we're done with comments. Mr. Rogers?
So in review, the first agenda item was the 2021 bond issuance update, which is informational. We discussed the finalized 2021 bond issuance and the positive impact it will have for financial savings and also the ability to continue our capital plan. The second item was board policy around meetings and will require board action. As Mr. Desnoyers stated, he'd like to hear from the board if they would like to move forward with the policy changes that were discussed this evening.
So, all in favor?
Do I need a motion?
So move. This is Director Warstavich.
We don't usually.
I don't think we need a motion. I think it's just an agreement of whether or not we want to move forward.
That's correct.
And Mr. Desnoyers,
Is anyone opposed to moving forward?
well, I mean, we want to I guess you're going to have to give us a review of the ones, because, you know, we went through a lot of policies,
Okay.
and some things we agreed to, some things we didn't. So I don't know if you could briefly or quickly give us a summary of the things that we agreed to.
Sure.
Doc-
Would it make sense that this comes forward in a first reading? And that at that point in time, at the first reading, the board can discuss that instead of a review tonight? These comments can come forward in a first reading, the discussion happens there. And
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. I like that idea. Does everybody concur with that?
Yes, I
Yes.
totally agree.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So the final item was, or policies from the July meeting for first reading that require board action. As Mr. Desnoyers described, there were no changes from the first reading, and the policies are 805, emergency preparedness, and 805.2, school security personnel. Would the board like to move these forward for a second reading?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
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 That concludes our agenda for the evening.
Okay, Mr. Fields, I'll take over from here. A motion is in order. Well, first, thank you, Mr. Fields, for taking us through that meeting, and Mr. Desnoyers, thank you for that, taking you through the policies and explaining them the way you did. Really appreciate that. You do a good job with that. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.